Good morning, everyone. My name is Jan. I'm part of the IXEG team, and together we're going to do a nice afternoon flight from Seattle, Washington to Portland, Oregon now. And you can see Mount Rainier sitting in the background there as we're holding short runway 16 left in Seattle. This is going to be the first video of a series of videos I'm going to do with the IXEG 737 and X-Plane 12, just flying from A to B, commenting on what I do in my real job. I'm an airline pilot for a major European airline, currently type rated on the 747-400 and -8, but I've flown the 737-300 and 400 and 500 variants for 10 years. But it's been a while ago since I've done that because my airline phased them out in 2014-15, and 2012 was my last flight, so that's over 10 years ago. So some procedures have changed. Also, I'm used to operating these types of aircraft in a two-man crew, at least two-man crew. On the 747, we're often three guys in the cockpit, which really helps when you depart Mexico City at 3 a.m. in the morning of your own body's time. And that's why I ask you to be a little lenient with me if I forget some things that I should be doing. Okay, let's get going. And I'm here in the cockpit. This is the so-called turnaround state. You know that you can invoke the start states here, and we're in turnaround now. And the first thing that you want to do when you do a flight is you want to check your weight and balance. So go to the X-plane configuration, weight and balance, and we're going to add a screen like this to our bump out menus. That's a much requested item. We'll do that in the future, so that you can set your fuel and your weight and the center of gravity directly in the IXEG menu. For now, you have to go through X-plane's default menu and make sure that you're on the metric or customary, your choice up here. I'm using the metric system. It's the only real system. Everyone knows that. But that's what I'm used to. So we're in kilograms. And you can see that the plane sometimes spawns at the real empty weight. There's no payload at all. And if you click on Restore Defaults, it jumps to a more sensible weight. That's 46.6 tons. That's a pretty good average weight that we used to see during operations, going between 50 and 40 tons maybe. And the center of gravity is at 24.1% MAC. Memorize that, 46.6, 24.1. You'll need that in a minute. And of course you can increase or decrease weights as you want. And if you add less cargo in the aft, you'll see the center of gravity shift to the front. We'll just go with the defaults right now, and we click on Done, Apply Changes, and you may see the plane shift a little as the weight is added. Now, if you're like me and you tend to forget things, then go ahead and enter the 46.6 right away. And you can also go to the N1 limit page and then skip to the takeoff page and enter the 24.1. So you have that out of your head, and you see the trim value is 4. And conveniently, that is the default value that the plane spawns with. So you don't have to worry about setting your trim. But if you do have a center of gravity that is different from 24.1, then you please make sure that you trim the plane before takeoff, because otherwise it may leap up into the air, or you'll have a hard time rotating when the VR comes around. Okay, before we start, we'll just go over the overhead panel real quick. This should be on. Sometimes when you switch or when you spawn in this start state, it's off, so make sure that the yaw damper is on. I'll look at that in a while to see what's going on here. And we have the APU running. You can see that it's supplying the power to the aircraft right now. We'll turn on the seatbelt signs so people sit down. We'll turn on the window heat so the windows get nice and warm for takeoff. And if you look around in the turnaround state, Tom has the cockpit door to be open, and I'm going to close that because I don't want to take off with the open cockpit door. Nowadays that's part of the checklist, but in the one that we use it isn't. Now the last thing you want to do on the overhead panel is you want to set your cabin control. And this is the auto section here on the left side. We're going to cruise at level 190, I determined, and the landing altitude is 30 feet approximately for Portland. So you put that in here, and that's that. Now I'm going to feed the FMS, and if you program your routing into the FMS, it's always good to have some charts available so you know what to expect. And I put in some charts here. I downloaded them from the internet. You can also do that for your own use. That's free of charge, and I do that at skyvector.com. And for example, I picked out the departure chart. There's the Seattle 8 departure, which is conveniently just straight ahead and then fly heading 165. You can see here's the description: 165 on heading 165, and then Seattle radial 161, and then you can expect vectors to the routing. That's pretty normal way of proceeding for US airports. They like to keep it simple, and I like that a lot. Then we'll fly the Helens 8. Is it Helens? No, Helens 6 arrival. And you can see up here, it does start at Seattle, or there is a transition that starts at Seattle. That's where we'll take off, but we'll just follow the departure, and then we'll get vectors to Helens. That's where the regular part of the arrival starts. It goes to Battleground, and then on heading 110, and we're going to fly to Portland International, and we'll land runway 28. And that's what I have over here. Zoom in with my mouse wheel. And you can see here's Battleground up, and we'll fly. So there's a approach transition that goes from Battleground, and it heads towards the initial approach fix of Nacy. But then you would have to fly a procedure turn to align with the approach. And what we'll do is we'll just proceed from Battleground on the heading 1110 vector, and then we'll assume that we get vectors to let's fly to Schaefer maybe, and then from Schaefer to Reedy, and Reedy all the way to the ILS. Okay, so that's what I expect to find in the FMS, and once you have a good idea of what you're trying to program into it, you can go about doing that. And we'll start with the origin, KSEA, Seattle, and we'll go to destination KPDX. Now, whenever you put something new or even old into the origin, let's try that, KSEA again, and look what happens to the destination. It blanks, because putting something into the original means you're starting out anew with your flight plan. So if you mess up, you don't know what you put in there, you don't want to, just want to get rid of all of it, just put in the same or a new origin, and that erases the whole route. That's convenient to know. We're not going to put in the flight number now. You can make up your own flight number, and I'll start with the departure. And we wanted to take off 16 left. Always start with the runway, because then you get a list of applicable departures, and you don't have to, go through all the departures. I always start out with the runway, and we wanted to take this Seattle 8. You can already see that pop up over here. Then we'll go with the route, and now you could enter your airways, but since it's just a short flight, we're going to KPDX, and again start with the runway, ILS 28 right we want to do, and we wanted to do the Helen 6 star, and then you have the star transition. Remember, that is the part that becomes before the star, and we looked at the Seattle, but we decided not to do that, so we're just going to look at the approach transitions over here, and we wanted to do the Schaefer one. So that should put the routing into our route page, and you can see the plane does not know what to do after the vectors. It knows you want to go to Helens, but there's a discontinuity here. And the same situation here after the Helen 6, it ends with vectors, and then the plane does not know what to do, so it puts in a discontinuity. And in the case of vectors, you can close the discontinuity, because the plane will just assume you'll fly on the vectors for a long time before going to Helens. But we can also leave it open. That's totally fine, and it should not matter. So let's activate that and execute it, and we'll click back on init ref. That's always a good way to go to the next page that expects entry. And you can see we want to enter reserves. If there's boxes on the FMS, that's a good sign that the FMS needs input here to continue computing. If there are dashes like this, that means you could enter something if you wanted to. Reserves, we'll just go with 2.0. And then the cruise altitude, we wanted to do 190. And that lights up the execute button again. Now the FMS has enough data to start the computation of the routing, the vertical part, and it will figure out where the top of climb, descent, and so on is. Here we have a fairly light load on a long runway, so 45 degrees is a good choice for a temperature assumed. That's a way to derate the, or to not apply full power. You see the N1 jump down to 89.0. That's the assumed one now. And you can see one is 89, one is 88. Why is that? Because we have only one pack on here. And if a pack is off, then you can get a little more N1, but this should even out once we turn on both packs for takeoff. And then we go to the takeoff page. The suggestion is flaps 5. We'll confirm that suggestion. You know, the font goes big. It's kind of hard to see, but still want to do that. And then we can just accept the speeds here. And what we'll do, oh, you know what, the CG reverted again when we cleared the routing, I think. So we'll put in 24.1. And then we want to set 122. I'm not going to set VR because it's right close to V1. We have these plastic bugs over here, but they're so close that I'm just going to set V1, and I know VR is right behind it. And V2, 134 you put up here on the mode control panel. And then we said we wanted to do 124. And then we put one bug at V2 plus 15, so 134, 144, 149. This is the maneuvering speed. If you're at takeoff flaps, if you want to do a 25-degree bank, you need to be above this little bug. Otherwise, it's limited to 15 degrees bank in this section here. And then I put another one at 170. This is the flaps 1 speed, the speed that you want to have when going from flaps 5 to flaps 1 during the acceleration. And of course, for role-playing reasons, you can do the same thing over here. On the FO side, he would do it himself, of course, and we are planning to add a function where where they're synced, so you don't have to set up each one separately. Now, the next thing we want to make sure is that we have the altimeter set up correctly. To do that, I'm going to listen to the ATIS. It's 118.0 here, and I'm going to enable the right VHF radio receiver.
Information, Romeo, 20, 50, Zulu, wind, light and variable, visibility 10 miles, rain, sky conditions, broken at 22,000, scattered at 37,000.
It's raining, of course.
Temperature 15, dew point 10, altimeter 2968, arriving runways 16 left.
So 2968 it said. So we have 2968. There we go. 2968. Did I hear that correctly? Let's see. I'm going to look at Seattle again. And does it say the elevation of this place somewhere? Probably not. But you know what? We can just check this here. Go to the map. And I always like to check what I hear on the radio. 433 feet is the mean sea level elevation, and that matches with what we have on the altimeters. Okay, so that is good. And I'm leaving the standby altimeter set to the standard setting here. Okay, turn on the auto throttle. Nowadays they do that right away at the parking position. We used to do it just before lineup, but I'll do it now so we don't forget. And I'm going to do the pre-flight checklist. Pins and covers removed, oxygen tested, instrument transfer switch is normal, window heat, we turned that on, hydraulics are set, air conditioner pressurization set, flight instruments are set, parking brake is set, engine start levers are cut off, and rudder and aileron trim 0, taxi takeoff briefing completed, fuel pumps are on, passenger signs are set, auto brake RTO, whoops, there we go. FMC pre-flight completed, takeoff speeds, V1 122, VR 124, V2 134, and MCP V2 heading, oops, another oops, I think it's 161, and we're going to just put in 6,000 here. There's no altitude specified for this departure. They would tell you, or the tower would tell you, or the departure frequency, but we're going to put in 6,000. And that's the pre-flight checklist completed. And we're going to do the before start items. Turn on the anti-collision light, turn off the second pack so we have enough oomph for the starter. And we read the before start checklist. Doors and windows are closed. Actually, we're going to check with the flight attendants if they closed all the doors and you see all the check marks are gone. We'll check with the ground crew. The cargo doors are closed as well, so yes, all doors and windows are closed. Anti-collision light is on. Transponder as required. Oops, forgot that one as well. So we're going to turn on the transponder to auto. We don't have a code assigned. We'll just assume it's 3250. And you want to turn that on before you start taxiing because it enables the ground controller at big airports to see you on the radar screen as you move along the taxiways, together with a data tag of your flight number and stuff like that. And later on, before we take off, we're going to turn on the TCAS as well. And that's the before start checklist complete. You can either click on the X to get rid of it or just click here in the little gap and it disappears. And one last thing I want to do, I want to set this one, EHSI, up to the map mode. And I'm going to tune 116.8. And that is Seattle. And you see 1.6 miles that direction. That looks plausible. And I'm also going to give my first officer the map view. That's the view that we really use the most. We like to set a different scale. He's at 80 miles now, I'm at 10 miles, so that's a good variation right there. All right, so let's start the engines. We'll go engine start, engine number 2 start, switch to ground, watch the duct pressure drop as air rushes into the starter. And you can see the start valve light is open and you see N1 starts to turn. I know that the engine start is progressing at a weird pace right now. We're trying to get that cleared up with laminar research. Austin is working on that, 25% N2, add fuel and ignition. And you see it rises a little too fast in this area between 25 and 46% when the starter cuts out. And I slowed down the starting progress as it approaches idle power so that the total time to start is approximately correct, but you can say that it is a little fast as you initially start fuel. Get left engine started, duct pressure drop, start valve open light, and the left engine starts spinning. And again, 25%, add fuel and ignition. Engine ramps up really quick. Watch the EGT, the start limit is 725, but it stays below that nicely. And as the engine comes back from the max EGT and the N2 approaches 60%, you can order the after start items, connect the generators, check for frequency and voltage, and then turn on the pitot static heat, turn on the packs again, turn off the APU bleed, put the cabin control to flight mode, turn these ones, start switches to continuous, and turn off the APU to not waste fuel. And now your hand drops down, you go to set the takeoff flaps, check that the transponder is on, and last but not least, push recall. No lights stay on, and then you go with the before taxi checklist. And it's before taxi generators are on, pitot heat on, anti-ice as required, PAX auto, isolation valve auto, Yes, it is. Start switch is continuous. Recall checked. Start levers idle. Fuel. Flight controls check. Well, I haven't checked them yet, but I'll do that. You see they do move kind of slow. If you slam over the joystick as fast as you can, it moves much faster than the controls do, but the real controls don't move any faster than that. I've done the flight control check too many times to count, and you can be Hercules, you cannot move them any faster than this from side to side, and that's what we modeled. Because I heard some complaints about that. And the ground equipment is removed, flaps are 5, and the APU is off. Okay, this guy gets the legs page, I'm getting the takeoff page, and now we would taxi, and I'm just going to release the brakes, and you'll see the plane starts moving. This is realistic. At most weights, the 737 will start moving as soon as you release the brakes, unless you're on a hot day, really high altitude, heavy weight, factors like that. Okay, we're ready to go. And you can see that we have some doubling up with the checklist. We have a before taxi checklist here on this one, and there's a stick checklist here, taxi, and it does kind of like do the same things. This is from an older time when I still flew the airplane. This is from a little newer time when Boeing changed the procedures, and you can see they do double up. Doesn't hurt to do them both. Taxi, flight controls check, flaps 5, green light, trim is 4.000, cabin report received. For example, the trim you catch here. Now there's a before takeoff checklist here, and that's the same thing. Flaps set green, trim set, cabin call given. So it's kind of like the same items that you have on there, and it's your choice if you do the before takeoff checklist procedures of this time or the old taxi checklist that we have on the stick here with a little yellow marker that marks your progress, because sometimes you do get interrupted by ATC, and then it's good to know where you left off, and if in doubt, just redo the whole checklist. Okay, before takeoff checklist is complete, and we are getting a lineup, so I'm going to turn on the strobe lights. Taxi lights go off. Actually, now the taxi lights would still be on. This is the way I like to taxi, with the runway turnoffs on as well for increased visibility. As we line up, I'm going to turn the TCAS to TARA, and you will see that it says TA only, but that's below a certain altitude, I think 2,000 feet. That signals other aircraft that no, we will not avoid you. You need to do the avoiding because we don't want to get pushed down onto the ground by a resolution advisory. Check the approach sector before you line up and make sure that no one made a mistake, and we'll take it kind of slow. We'll turn on the flight directors for takeoff as well. Make sure that you turn on the flight director first, that is on your side, the one that you fly. You will see the little MA light up. That's the master light, and that slaves the flight control computer on your side to instruments. For example, if you want to do an ILS approach and you set that on the left side, but the master is on the right, and then you can hit approach all you want, because the flight control computer will look for the ILS on the right side then, and it wouldn't work. So master's on my side, that is good. And with the takeoff clearance, we turn off the taxi lights, because they are kind of brittle, and when they get shaken about during the takeoff run, they tend to burn out if they're really hot. So we like to turn them off during takeoff. All right, let's go. Let's see what else I forgot. So to take off, you advance the thrust levers until they're at about 40%. Then you click the takeoff go round button that you hopefully mapped to a joystick, and then you push the thrust levers all the way to the front so that you could pull them back in case of a rejected takeoff, and that would engage auto brake and stuff like that. Okay, thrust is set. 80 knots. V1, hands off the throttle, rotate, pitch up slowly, 3 degrees per second, 10 degrees, feel the plane come up, go to about 18 degrees, positive rate, gear up. And you see the speed stabilizes at about V2 plus 15, that is the speed that you want to have after you lift off. Trim a tiny bit, and as I'm just by myself, I'm going to use the autopilot judiciously on this flight. It's a joy to hand fly this aircraft, and if there are two people in the cockpit with one, operating radios and setting modes and stuff, and it's fine to fly manually, but I'm just by myself, so I'm going to use the autopilot here. And you see 1,500 feet above ground, it comes back to climb power. That's also announced here, reduced climb. And I'm going to hit LNAV to follow the Seattle 8 departure for now. Time to enjoy, look at Mount Rainier again, and maybe jump outside and look at the airport and Seattle there in the background. Okay, time to accelerate. I'm going to use VNAV for this, and I'm going to put the gear lever to off. I like to do that early because if you go too far, you may drop the gear again. It has happened before. And if you do that later on when you're doing 300 knots, then you're over the gear extension speed, so not a good idea. Passing 170 knots, we go to flaps 1, 2 clicks. We want to step over flaps 2, you never use that. And passing 190, flaps up. And you can see the FMS is still limiting the speed to 220 because the flaps are not up yet. And now they're up, so it goes to the speed restriction of 250. Okay, ATC calls me and they say you're cleared direct to Helens, so I'm going to take Helens, put it on the line select key 1 left, enter and execute. Plane goes to Helens. I like to always have at least the first waypoint I'm navigating to on my map display, so I increase to 80. You could also see that over here. And the plane comes up on the 6,000 feet. I did not get clearance to climb further yet, so it went to altitude acquire, but now ATC calls me and says resume climb to, let's say, 11,000 feet. So I'm going to hit VNAV again, and it will resume the climb. We can turn off the auto brake now. And I'm also going to turn on my terrain. For a second it will show the display of the weather radar. The terrain display does use the weather radar system to show elevations, and you can see here Mount Rainier, and there's Mount St. Helens already in the background, and they're up to 13,300 feet. Beautiful day today. It's over there. Picking up just a little bit of turbulence. And ATC clears us all the way to level 190. And oh, forgot to start my lapse time. I always forget something. See, a lapse time, and normally you would also start the chronometer when you take off. Now that's too late, so I'm just going to reset it to 0, but you want to have the elapsed time so you know how long the flight's been. And I'm going to also reset my speed bugs to 110 or whatever you want, because in case I forget them on my approach preparations, I want to be alerted. Oops, I forgot something. They're all clustered together. Plane pitches down to accelerate. That's time to turn the seatbelt signs to auto, and also the ignition switches to off. And make sure that you don't go above 7 degrees approximately on the climb. What we like to do if that happens is we'll take VNAV off, we'll go to N1, and then you are in control wheel steering pitch, and now you can use your joystick to pitch down. The N1 means that the plane is maintaining climb power on the engines, and yes, speed will vary a little, you need to watch that, but if you're just over 5 degrees, things should not get out of hand really. As we're climbing to a flight level now, I'm going to set my altimeter to 2992, the standard setting. So does my FO. And you say altimeters 29992 13,200 or level 132. Okay, we'll leave the landing lights on until we're out of 18,000 feet. That's just because there could be uncontrolled aircraft here. We're probably still in Bravo airspace, but you never know. And we turned the seatbelts to auto only because that adds the additional safeguard of the flaps. If I extend the flaps now with the seatbelts on auto, they will come on, and that saved my behind once already, because there's not really a reminder to turn on the seatbelts before you approach an airport, and if you forget, at least they turn on when you extend the flaps, and then you go, oops, we forgot, because you hear the ding, and then the flight attendant charges into the cockpit saying, oh my god, it's only 5 minutes, and then you say yep, and then she says I can't do that, and then you say okay, we'll do a 360 or 2, and admit that you made a mistake. Okay, coming up on 190 in a second. What you want to do before you approach a cleared altitude is always use vertical speed to reduce your climb rate. The reason is the TCAS system. If there's another aircraft cruising 1,000 feet above you and you come charging up at 3,000 feet per minute, it will get a TCAS resolution advisory, probably bumping it out of its level, and that's why I'm going to use vertical speed. Come back to 1,000. It's a little cumbersome because it takes you out of VNAV and you have to, check your speed and then later on enable it again. But that's just something that is procedure, and we don't question that. Okay, there's the crater of Mount St. Helens. We all know what happened to it. And there's Mount Rainier. As the plane levels off, time to look around. I think Lamina really did a good job with the clouds. They're really coming along lately. Really enjoy looking at them. Okay, dokie, here comes the level off. Now it's time to turn off your landing lights. One more thing that I'll probably forgot on my descent. And never a dull moment in the cockpit. We're getting closer to our destination. I'm putting 116.6 battleground. You can see the little green symbol. That means it's tuned now, and 65 miles to go. And we're not getting a top of descent, probably because we have this discontinuity still in there. And what we want to do is figure out how far it is to go to the airport. So I'm going to look at the ILS-28, and I know there's no VOR or anything on the airport itself, but there's the localizer 11.3, and it does have a DME with it. So I'm going to go ahead and set 11.3, double check that on my approach page, and it says ILS-28 right, 11.3, so that is correct, and I should pick up the DME at some point in time. And you can also look at the map. You see it's 40 miles to crater, 60 to battleground, 70 to the airport here, add another 10 for the approach, so 80 miles should be about 240 level, so we're still below that. If you have a problem figuring this stuff out, there's the aircraft. We're on the X-Aviation Classic, and we have the manuals. Here we go. And there's the distance versus altitude helper. You can zoom in on that. You say we're at 19,000, so we should be about 60 miles from the airport when we start the descent. So once it moves within 50 miles, approximately this range here, that's when I want to start my descent. And before I start the descent, we also want to do the check the ATIS, and porting ATIS is 128.35. So that's already conveniently set here. I'm going to switch the active channel, turn on the receiver. Alright, 2972 is the altimeter, runway 28 left, that's what we expect. So we can turn that off again, so we don't have to change anything on our FMS. And now ATC is nice and they clear us direct to Schaefer. So we're going to take Schaefer, put that on the legs page up here, hit execute, and now the routing is closed and we do get the top of descent over here. If you don't get a top of descent, or if you don't trust VNAV on the descent, it is still quirky, especially with lots of restrictions on the approach. Then just use vertical speed or flight level change. Do your own calculation. We always do that when flying the airplane. That does not mean that we don't want to fix that in the future to make it more reliable. But for now, you have to double check what the airplane does, and make sure that you don't get too high or too low on the approach. Another factor is the headwind. See, we have almost 50 knots of headwind. The FMS does not know about that. The real one doesn't either, unless you put it in the descent forecast page. That is not possible yet on our 737. We will add that in the future. But for now, if I just follow this descent profile in VNAV, it would mean that the plane will need to add power periodically, because with this headwind it cannot maintain the calculated path. I'll show you how that works in a second. What else is there to do? When you do the approach, you do the briefing well in time before the top of descent, and I would talk about the landing distance. The runway here is really long. I kind of like cleared that out. Here it is. You can see it's 9,200 feet, and you can see that here 9,800 even with the displaced threshold. So landing distance is not a factor, so we go with auto brake 2. That's pretty much a default setting if runway distance is not a factor. And again, I have a table in there on the other side, on the other not the charts, but the aircraft that you can use to check landing distances. And the weight right now is reset MCP altitude. Yes, I'll do that. We'll put that to maybe 12,000 for now, and the plane will descend, going back to VNAV, descend all by itself once it reaches the top of descent. Okay, let's go back here. We said weight is 45, so we're on a dry runway. 45, that should be 4,800 feet with flaps 40. We're doing a flaps 30 approach, so that's 5,000. So that is not a problem at all. Okay, what else to do? We'll do check the recall, and then we'll set the speed bugs. On the approach page, you can see it calculates VREF of 128. I'll double check that, 45.4, so that's 129, 128. Yep, that checks out. And then I'm going to put one speed bug to 128. The other one goes to 128 plus 15, 143. The same thing over here. Whoops, one too many, so 128 and 143. Now initially you will see the plane pitches down pretty rapidly to regain the flight path 2,000 feet per minute, that's not so bad. I've seen it do steeper descents, especially when you're way up high where it's trying to maintain a constant Mach number. The Mach number changes all the time with changing temperature, so it has to play catch up during the descent. That's why you will see pretty steep descent rates, 4,000, sometimes 5,000 feet per minute. That's not unusual. And if that is too uncomfortable for you or your passengers, just use vertical speed to get onto the profile a little more shallow. And talking about the passengers, we'll turn on the signs again now. We'll turn on the lights now that we go below 18,000. And since we're descending to an altitude, we want to set the altimeters, and I wrote that down, 2972. And you see as I changed the altimeters, the path just moved up, because now the plane says, whoops, I'm not really at this altitude, I'm really at this altitude, and adjusted the path correspondingly, 2972. And as it pitched up to regain the path, you can see that it got too slow. And the FMC goes back to FMC speed, adds thrust to regain the speed until it's back on the calculated descent speed, and then goes back to retard. And that's what it does to maintain the path, especially with this headwind, but also with my little fiddling there with the altimeters. Another thing we want to set is the minimum, and you see 281 rounded to the nearest 10 degrees, 290 is the minimum for straight in ILS. And you use this little orange caret for non-precision and precision approaches, 290, with that you do not use the radio altimeter with it. Some people will set 200 on the radio altimeter, but you only use the decision height for the radio altimeter on category 2 and 3 approaches. Don't do it on a category 1 approach. Here we get another burst of power to regain the path. We'll just live with that for now. And I'm going to reduce the range a little bit. And now it's time to find out what I forgot. Approach checklist. Recall was checked. Cabin control, 30 feet, descending nicely set. Outer brake 2. Speed box 128. And altimeters 2972. And 13,200. Approach checklist complete. Coming up on 12,000 feet here. Let's take a look at the nice scenery. Mount, well, sometimes I do get confused which one is which. They all look pretty. There's that river already that goes to Portland, and that should be somewhere over there in the haze. We're doing an approach into the light now, especially since it's late afternoon. So it's going to be a little difficult seeing the runway probably. Now we're doing an off-route or flight directly. Let's look at the arrival here again. We're coming from, we're cutting short here, coming up like this way, somewhere over here. So we really need to check the MSA 6,000 feet here north of Battleground. So we'll assume that for now, and the approach you can see starts here at 6,700. So I'm going to descend to 7,000 feet now. That should keep us nicely off the terrain. And let's do it with vertical speed for now. And we're going to fly 250 already. The plane is set up to fly 240 knots below 10,000 feet. Now, people always ask why 240? Well, the limit is 250. And if you fly on VNAV, the plane will control within plus minus 10 knots. So they set that to 240 so that you have a little leeway to not bust your speed limit. In theory, there's no speed limit in Bravo airspace, but it is a good habit. Most airports do have a limit of 250 below 10,000. And also, for the risk of bird strikes, you don't want to really charge down with 300 knots or more. At least I don't like to do it. Reduce the range a little bit further. And you can see that we're still Coming up on the path, about 1,000 feet high now. I want to be at Schaefer at 7,000. And I don't see the banana yet. What is the banana? Well, you will see it in a minute. There it is. And the banana says at the current ground speed and the current vertical speed, you're going to reach the set MCP altitude 7,000 at this position. So just before Schaefer, and that would work out just fine for me. After Schaefer, we can go down to 6,000 or 5,700. But we'll go to 6,000, and then after Reed we'll go to 4,000. We do pick up the DME to the runway 23.0. And the identifier is India, India, Alpha, Papa. And you can listen to that on the nav1. It's not coming in yet. We'll just leave it on. Let's see if we can pick it up later. Somewhere over there is where the airport is. If you want to know what I look like, this is what my brother looks like, and that's what I look like. My little stab at immortality. Okay, coming up at 7,000 feet, and maybe it's time to reduce speed a little. Here comes the identifier. Let's listen. India, India should be 2 dots, 2 dots. Short, long, and that's Papa. Okay, okay. India, India, Alpha, Papa identified. And if you don't know Morse code, I know most of the letters, but not all of them. You can double check that here. And of course, modern planes don't need you to identify this with listening to the Morse code. You can just it will identify it for you and display the code on the screen. So let's go to 6,000 feet. Always remember to turn your heading back to align with where your plane is going. It's just a habit that you'll pick up flying Boeing planes, because if ATC says turn left 5 degrees, you don't want to, spend 10 seconds dialing the heading to the front first. So one gate that you want to shoot at is when you are 10 miles from the airport. You want to be around 3,000 feet, 170 knots at flaps 5, and that gives you a nice stable approach to the runway. And we can see after Reedy we wanted to go to 4,000. You can already see that we're kind of like close to the glide slope, but if you're still off the localizer by a good bit, do not trust your glide slope too much. There could be side lobes or wrong indications. So there's altitude acquire. We wanted to maintain 6,000 until Reedy, but we do slow down a little bit already. 210 is minimum clean speed. If you cannot remember those speeds, you can cheat by looking here on the back side. There's the flap maneuvering speed. Flaps up is 210. And I also made a little list here on this on the EFB that you can look at to help you with that. So we're passing, so we're going down to 4,000. Use level change to go down. And we're going to flaps 1 already. Plane got kind of slow here. And that's just the way the real auto throttle works too. Sometimes it's a little, you know, relaxed. So we tend to fly 215 or so, not to get too slow. Go to flaps 5. Stepping over flaps 2. And you see we're coming up. We're pretty much on the glide slope here. And I'm going to arm the approach mode. Another 1,000 feet to go. Coming up here, we can go down to 3,700. And as we approach 3,700, I'm coming back to 170 knots like I said. So there's VOR lock and altitude acquire. Heading back goes to runway track. And that's 283, not 284. Can't be imprecise like that. Okay, and since we put out the flaps, we should also turn on the ignition. And it's getting dark, so I'm turning on the position lights already. Landing lights are on, just to double check. And now we're on glide slope, VOR lock, and we're descending with the ILS. Okie dokie. Now, you know, work is done pretty much. We just need to read the final, or what they call it nowadays, the landing checklist. Let's see. Yeah, it's a landing checklist over here. But I'm just going to use my stick checklist because I like the old final checklist. And it's fun to fly this airplane, so let's do that. We are going to turn off the flight directives and then the autopilot. You could do it the other way around, doesn't matter. I have the disconnect button mapped on my joystick. You could also click here on the two green lit lights here on the autopilot A button and then silence the warning like that. But I'm going to do it one click, a second click, and of course deselect speed. And now you can see the ghost throttle on the bottom right as I move my hardware thrust levers. See, they don't do anything, but as when I match them up with the virtual position of the thrust levers in the cockpit, now I grab them. And I'm going to reduce speed, or my co-pilot would do it to VREF +5, no wind 133, and go gear down. Coming a little slow here. Going a little high on the glide slope, that works well together. Gears down, flaps 15. Again, we step over flaps 10. Flaps 15 add a lot of lift, so you need to offset that by pushing down. Go to flaps 25, that adds a lot of lift again. I'm not going to trim yet because I know as the plane slows down I will need more nose up. You can see my yoke is deflected forward pretty good. And then go flaps 30. Arm the speed brakes. And at 1,000 feet above ground you want to be stabilized, so we have 300 feet to go. I expect about 53% N1 to maintain my approach path. So we're coming up on the speed now. And we're going to read the landing final checklist. 1,000 is checked, start switches are continuous, speed brake, armed green light, gear down 3 green, flaps 30 green light, final or landing checklist complete, and we can concentrate on the landing. A little hazy this morning, but already the poppies well in sight. A little low on the glide slope, so we need to add a little more thrust. There's a police car going across this bridge down there. Back on the slope, back on speed, coming back to 53%. And there's almost no wind. So working on my lineup. And to land the 737, you fly it down pretty close, maybe to 20 feet, 20 to 30 feet, and then you do a short break. You raise the nose by about 3 degrees, hold it there, and that should break the descent rate without floating too far. It's something that you need to practice. Doesn't always work well. But the good thing on the short range, your minimum continue, of course, short range flights, is that you get a chance to do it better really soon again.
50, 40, 30,
Brake,
20,
hold, power idle. Oh well. Spoilers are up, reverses normal. Idle reverse, auto brake does its job. Look at the auto brake disarm light down here. You don't want to see it come on, which means if I, fiddle with my wheel brakes like this, you would see it would come on, and then you know that the auto brake isn't doing its job anymore. At 60 knots, the FMS clears for the next flight. 60 knots was checked. Reverse goes back to idle, or actually forward thrust. And then we're turning off the runway. Now, how come my reverse isn't stowing? Here we go. So I'm not going to taxi all the way to the ramp now. This flight's been going way too long already. And I'm going to set the parking brake here, clear of the runway. And I'll show you the lazy man's way of retracting the speed brake. Just add thrust a little bit, the right one, and it will slam forward. That's a feature for the go around. If you ever have to do one and forget the speed brake, it will automatically retract. And yeah, let's look at the replay real quick. I found out that the replay is a little funky, but if you grab this and move it back kind of slow, then it works pretty reliably. And can look outside, coming in here over the car park. You can see a little early with the brake. Caused me to float a little longer than I should have. Lots of smoke. Spoilers come up, reverse deploys. Idle reverse only for noise reasons, most airports like that. And yeah, enough of the self back patting. I should have made that turn off really. But here we are, and I hope that you enjoyed the flight, and I'll do a next one fairly soon.